Hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to attend our presentation. We do have a lot to cover, so we will jump right into our presentation. The topic for today is looking at the Ontario's power system and how and what it takes to operate the power system for today, as well as
I'm
what
on now.
I would like to just remind everyone to keep themselves on mute. And another housekeeping item, this presentation is recorded for future reference for those that were unable to attend. And the topic for today's presentation is operating Ontario's power system today and what type of work the ISO is doing to prepare and plan for operating the power system for tomorrow. The presentation will be conducted by myself, Zishan, and I have a co-presenter, Emily, and we'll be presenting the material today. I think we can jump into the presentation at this time. And before I begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge, take a moment to acknowledge that we're coming to you from Toronto, which is Dish with a Spoon territory. We respectfully acknowledge the past and present traditional stewards of the land and their unique role in the life of the region. Toronto is one of the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We pay respect to their elders and present and emerging. As settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and play in this territory. We have some media in the presentation, so I'm going to turn off my video for now. So the agenda for today's presentation, actually the structure of the presentation would be, we would start off by discussing the Ontario's power system for today and the operation and what it is involved to operate today's power system. Then we'll switch gears and look at the operation and the planning, as well as the future needs of the power system and the steps that the ISO is taking to prepare for that power system. The presentation format will be, we'll have a Q&A session towards the end of those slides to take in any questions. So I would highly recommend that you drop any questions that you have in the chat box and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. And then looking at the details of the agenda, we'll talk about what the ISO is, what it does, what are its core responsibilities as it relates to the operation of the power system. And then we'll look at operating Ontario's power system today. What it is, what does it involve, and what type of assessments and the reliability assessments that takes place within Ontario's ISO to make sure that we have a clean and a reliable power system. We will shift our focus then towards the key trends that are emerging in Ontario's power system, look at the various initiatives that are taking place and how the ISO is leading and planning for those, such as decarbonization, electrification, and transformation of the power system. But then we'll dive into a energy storage case study that is connecting within Ontario and what type of concerns and challenges and the opportunities that we see from these type of scenarios. And then we'll end the presentation with looking at the power system of tomorrow and what are the possible technologies and advancements that we can expect to see in that power system. Now, this is a short clip that will talk about the Ontario's power system and its role in the sector as an overview. And
Today, millions of Ontarians rely on electricity to power their homes, schools, hospitals, and businesses. But who is responsible for maintaining a reliable supply of electricity? From the power plants to the customer, Ontario's independent electricity system operator acts like the air traffic controller for the grid. ensuring enough electricity is available when and where it is needed. We monitor Ontario's energy needs in real time, balancing supply and demand and directing the flow of electricity across transmission lines to communities across the province, while ensuring the grid is reliable and protected against cybersecurity threats. At the IESO, we also manage and evolve Ontario's electricity market, improving the way we buy and sell electricity, driving competition, and helping to keep electricity costs affordable. And for customers, the IESO provides energy efficiency incentives and training to help better manage their energy use and reduce electricity costs. As Ontario's energy sector continues to see significant change, we sit in the center of the power system between suppliers and users of electricity. We have a unique long-term view as Ontario's electricity system planners, ensuring we have reliable power when needed. We are also integrating new technologies into the system. The IESO works closely with industry, municipalities, Indigenous communities, producers and consumers, innovators and academics to identify the best options to meet growing needs. We understand the trends, what the opportunities are, and what the challenges will be as we move forward together. The IESO is positioned to deliver the essential service that Ontario requires today, tomorrow, and for years to come.
So this present video clip was a good overview of all the functions that the ISO performs in ensuring that we plan and operate a reliable power system. Some of the key takeaways and the key points that I want to highlight from that video was, one of the core functionality of the ISO is operating the province-wide grid 24/7, and that ensures that the electricity from all the resources is being supplied in a reliable and effective manner to all the loads. So when we do turn on our lights and the loads across the provinces do turn on, that they have a high degree of expectancy to have that light turn on. One second major function is to oversee the electricity market, drive competition, and maintain affordability. In this case, ISO serves as a function to ensure that there's an efficient, transparent, and a competitive market for every resource within Ontario so that ratepayers can benefit from this. ISO also plans for Ontario's future energy needs, and there are different planning timeframes that exist. Anywhere from 20 to 5 years out, we're looking at the system needs, how they will emerge, and what type of a system and what upgrades are necessary and required to allow for these type of connections and these type of system needs to be able to reliably supply them. And then another function, and we do have a few teams across the organization looking at supporting innovation and emerging technologies in North America, but beyond as well, across the world. We're looking at patterns of potential technologies that are coming out and what type of a system and what upgrades are necessary for us to be able to integrate some of these technologies and how they can help improve our efficiency as a power system in general. And we're working closely across the province with communities to explore sustainable options. And this includes when we're developing and involved with looking at transmission development, resource development, and most recently, we've been looking and working with communities in Northern Ontario and connecting a lot of remote communities with the existing electricity grid. And we're enabling province-wide energy conservation programs to allow for an efficient power system. And in this presentation in particular, we unfortunately won't be able to cover all the different topics that the ISO is responsible for. We'll dive deep into two main ones. We'll look at the operations and we'll look at the technologies and the emerging needs of the system and how ISO is preparing to allow for some of these technologies and new resources to interconnect and supply electricity to the Ontario system. This is a good general overview of a generic power system. And I like this slide for multiple reasons. It allows us to see where the ISO's responsibilities are, what type of work the ISO is responsible for. So in a general power system, you have resources, your generators that are participating and generating power in the system. And they could be, generation could be commissioned from various different resources. It could be solar, wind, nuclear, gas, hydroelectric. And then that generation is connected to a transmission system. And analogy of a transmission system is similar to like a highway. The objective of the transmission system is to take this generation from all the resources that are interconnected at various points within the Ontario system and deliver it to all the various load points. And looking at the load points, we have industrial large load customers. And then we also have all the local distribution companies that are distributing the electricity within different cities. And they will get it to all the different retail and residential loads within their own cities. And the ISO's main function is to operate the transmission system to ensure a healthy and a reliable balancing of demand as well as supply, and making sure that when the customer turns or demands that electricity, it is available to them. Now, looking at different resources and the supply mix that exists in Ontario. So when we're looking at resources and what type of fuel is used to generate that electricity, there's two main ideas to consider. One of them is the installed capacity, and the second is the total energy output. And installed capacity is the total number of megawatts, the active power available based on the resources that are connected to the grid. And looking at this, Ontario's capacity supply as of December 2022, we had about 34% nuclear, 28% gas, 23% hydroelectric, 13% wind, and solar and biofuel was less than 1%. That's the total installed capacity in Ontario. Now, energy is how are we using that capacity that is connected to the grid over a duration of a given time. Now, looking at energy usage that was in 2021, we do have 34% capacity that is connected. However, we use 58%, relied on it for 58% energy usage. And next, we have hydro at about 24%. And then we have gas and oil at 9%, wind at 8%, and biofuel, solar, and other resources were less than 1% in terms of energy uses. And one thing to note over here is Ontario has one of the cleanest energy generation in all of North America. And if you look at it over here, is about 60% nuclear and 25% hydro. Over 80% of energy generated in 2021 was purely from clean energy resources. And it's also important to note that a diverse supply mix, it reduces the impact of weather, policy changes, and economic shifts, which leads to a more reliable and a resilient power system. Now, shifting gears a little bit, these are the different stages of power system assessments that take place over within the ISO. And starting, if we start at the left, looking at that, we have planning, and the planning timeframes, as I mentioned earlier, are anywhere from a few years in advance to 20 plus years out, looking into the future needs, economic growth, the load growth in the system at various pockets within the system, and then planning for the system and ensuring that we have enough resources, transmission to be able to supply that demand that we do see emerging in the future. And then the studies in the planning timeframe are more related to that nature, looking at different scenarios of economic load growth and ensuring that we have a reliable system and the right investments in place to be able to supply that system that's emerging in the future. Now, as we start shifting to more connections that are more likely to connect, there's a team that looks at the connection assessment process. And these are the projects that we expect to connect to the power system in Ontario with a high degree of certainty. And at this stage, the ISO does assessments to ensure that this project, whether it is a transmission project, a load project, a generator project, that it does not have an adverse impact to the existing electrical system. And then it provides recommendations of how to connect that project itself. And then as we move further in this stage, we start looking at verification and modeling. One of the most effective ways to plan and operate the power system is to model it in simulation tools and study different operating as well as planning conditions for that power system. So once a project starts going through the connection assessment phase and beyond, we start looking at modeling that project in our existing power system. And we verify that model using different tests that we have within the ISO. And then closer to operations, we look at limits. We impose limits. We do studies and assessments to impose limits on the power system to ensure that it is reliable. And then we schedule the system outages. And that is important. We have a lot of elements in the power system, and they do need to go on periodic outages in order to maintain and stay reliable. And in order to do so, ISO takes a role in managing these outages to ensure that every equipment that is going on an outage, it doesn't reduce the reliability of the power system. And finally, we'll look at the control room actions and the real-time decisions that take place on a moment by moment basis to ensure that we have a reliable power system. In this presentation in particular, we're going to be focusing on more of the real-time operation of the power system. We're looking at the limit that are imposed on the power system. What are they? How are they developed? And what does it mean to impose a limit on the power system? We'll look at the scheduling, the outages that we're scheduling on the power system. And then we'll finally look at the real-time operations. And let's talk about what is the ISO control grid before we talk about the reliability of this control grid. It is part of the Eastern interconnection. What that means is that the ISO power system is connected to our neighboring power systems, and those power systems are connected to their neighboring power system, forming the Eastern Northeastern interconnection in the North America. And Ontario in particular is connected to Manitoba, Minnesota, Michigan, New York, and Quebec. In terms of transmission level voltages, the system is mainly comprised of 500 kilovolt circuits, 230 kilovolt circuits, and 115 kV transmission circuits. And here's a diagram of Ontario and the transmission circuits that are there and the various resources that are connected within Ontario at various points within Ontario. And in order to manage the power system in an effective manner, manage, plan, and operate the power system, it is divided into 10 geographical zones. And that just allows us to effectively operate and plan for the system. I mentioned this earlier a little bit, and the power system needs to be modeled in order for the ISO to study it so that we can plan and operate this power system. And in this model, it's a very complex and a very large power system. We have about 4,000 electrical buses, 500 generator resources, and over 2,500 transmission circuits. And one thing to note, this is the largest, world's largest man-made machine interconnected system is the North American power grid. And Eastern interconnection is one of, Eastern and Western interconnections are the two main parts of the North American power grid. Now, looking at one particular function, ISO does perform a lot of functions, but one particular function that is related to the operation of the system is ISO as a reliability coordinator. This is a designation that the ISO possesses to ensure reliability on the operation of the power system. And one of the main functions of this is ensuring a reliable balancing of supply and demand, which is a moving target. As your load increases throughout the day and throughout the year on a moment by moment basis, the supply is where the ISO is ensuring that the supply is in line with what the demand requires. And this ensures that there's a real-time operational reliability of the transmission system. And some of the governing bodies that are tied to this function is the NERC, which is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. And they oversee the reliability standards and compliance of the North American power system. So everything within North America. And then we have NPCC, which is more closer to home, and it is a Northeast Power Coordinating Council. And this looks at the northeastern portion of North America. And over here we have New Brunswick, Quebec, Ontario, New York, all the areas, power systems in the northeastern parts of North America. And then diving even deeper, ISO has market rules which govern the performance and the requirements of equipment that is connecting to the power system. And the ISO is responsible for developing, ensuring that the compliance is met to all the equipment that is connected to the ISO control grid. So before we look at what functions and what roles that the ISO plays in ensuring a reliable power system, I think it's important to emphasize the importance of a reliable power system. And looking back at the 2003 blackout and its impacts, there were significant impacts over the 4-day period when this blackout occurred. We had over 55 million people that were directly affected. There was significant impact on critical infrastructure, from power generation to water treatment and water supply facilities, transportation facilities, communication infrastructure, airport closures. So we were highly reliant as a society on the power system and its need to be reliable. There were major disruptions to a lot of industrial activity, a lot of automotive manufacturing plants, petroleum refineries, steel and chemical plants, a lot of disruption to the industrial processes due to a lack of electricity. And over 100 deaths were associated to this blackout, and 6 billion in economic cost as estimated by US Department of Energy. So we can see that it's very clear that the need for a reliable power system is extremely important, and to ensure that because our society has a high reliance on the power system, the ISO plays a very important role in Ontario to ensure that the power system is reliable, and when we do turn on the lights, that we expect a high degree of certainty that they will turn on. Now, what is, in terms of definitions, what is power system reliability? The best way to think about it is mainly has two pillars, and one pillar is security, the other pillar is adequacy. Security in terms of power systems is the ability of the power system to withstand a predefined event or disturbance and not cause an adverse impact to the system. And some examples of adverse impacts are instability, uncontrolled separation, and cascading outages. So that's the security portion. Some of the principles that are applied to ensure a reliable power system is to prevent the disturbance from occurring. And the second is to minimize its impact and finally to contain the disturbance or the event to a particular part of the system and not allow it to expand and cause cascading concerns in the system. And one of the most effective tools that is used to achieve a secure power system is to impose limits on the power system. And I'll talk about what are limits and how we are imposing them on the power system. Now, the second principle for power system reliability is adequacy. And this is the ability to provide sufficient capacity as well as energy. And we talked about that a little bit earlier, to meet the demand and have sufficient transmission to deliver supply to all the loads. And this includes outage management and effective planning of the power system. So the capacity principles are having enough, sorry, adequacy principles are having enough capacity, energy, effective outage management, and a reliable balancing of supply and demand on a real-time basis. One way to think about is, adequacy is planning of future power system needs, the infrastructure that is necessary to operate the power system at its peak demand, as well as outage management and a moment by moment balancing of the power system. So I talked about security being the power system's ability to withstand an event or a disturbance and not cause adverse impact. So what is a disturbance on the power system? It is a sudden change on the system or a fault on the power system. And what that means is, it could be due to a number of reasons that we do see disturbance or an event on the power system. And one of them could be weather conditions. If you have lightning on the transmission circuits, or there's rain, freezing rain, strong winds, snow or ice accumulation on the transmission system. These transmission lines are really long and they're exposed to all the weather elements. And a lot of these elements can cause a fault on the power system. We could have equipment failures on the power system. You could even have human errors on the power system that could lead to faults on the power system. And if there is a fire in the vicinity of the power system or a transmission line, the smoke of the fire could ionize that air, and that could cause faults on the transmission system. So there's a lot of things that could occur that would cause a change or a fault or a disturbance on the power system. And some sudden changes could be an equipment outage that was planned. For example, a transmission circuit that was going on an outage. Taking that outage or taking the transmission circuit will cause a change on the power system. And the ISO is responsible for managing that change to ensure that doesn't cause any adverse impact. You could lose an element on the power system without a fault, and you could have large changes in load. If a large industrial load suddenly turns on or off, that could cause adverse impact on the power system if it's not prepared for appropriately. Another significant point to note here is, what is a recognized disturbance? What is reasonable for us to plan and operate the power system to? What is a reasonable standard? And a question I would, normally ask here is like, is it reasonable to assume the loss of 20 elements simultaneously? And this is where it comes to balancing the risk versus the cost of operating and planning a system. So a system that can sustain the loss of 20 elements lost simultaneously, a system that is designed to that standard, the cost associated with that system is extremely high. So another important concept when designing, operating, and planning the power system is to ensure that we have a healthy balance between the risk and the probability of that disturbance occurring versus the cost associated with alleviating that risk or cost. Now let's look at what are power system limits. One way to think about it is they are analogous to speed limits on the highway, which are dependent on, your road conditions, whether you're in city or on the highway, or whether you have icy or healthy, sunshine road conditions. And the second thing is, if you think about loading capacity on a bridge, which is the weight capacity on the bridge, is similar to that on the power system. You have transmission lines, and we cannot load them beyond a certain point due to a range of conditions. You could have thermal overloading of the transmission circuits. You could have voltage limitations. You could have instability or stability issues on the power system itself. And some of the parameters that you could use to limit the power system are active power, voltage, and electrical angle. And one of the most common ones that is used is the active power, limiting the active power that is being transmitted on the transmission lines. Now, looking at power system stability, I touched on it a little bit in the last slide that, we impose limits on the power system to prevent the system from becoming unreliable. And one of the phenomena is power system stability you prevent the system from becoming. In general, in any system, stability is the condition of equilibrium between two opposing forces. And in power systems in particular, following a recognized disturbance, and we talked about a recognized disturbance and the balance of cost versus risk of what is considered a legitimate and a recognized disturbance, the system should regain a state of operating equilibrium. One thing to note over here is that the system where it goes to after the disturbance may not be the same state as the original equilibrium, but it does need to go into a second state of equilibrium. I do have some simulations over here for a generic power system, for a generic system that's not related to power system. In this case, you have a ball and a plane, which is a hill in the middle. And if you apply a disturbance to that ball, you would expect that ball to oscillate and go to its second equilibrium point, which is what we see over here. In this case, this is an example of a stable power system where a disturbance is applied, and after the disturbance was applied, the system regained an equilibrium state on a secondary operating state. Now, this is an example of an unstable power system. Exact same system, a disturbance is applied to it, and you see the ball flies off the plane that it was operating under. And you could think of this system in particular in two ways. The disturbance that was applied was of higher magnitude, or the friction on the plane was lower, so the ball was able to fly off. Now, how do you secure or impose limits on this system to ensure that it doesn't become stable? So this is an example, one example of many. You could increase the friction on the plane, and that would reduce the ball's ability to move into a unstable region. But in this case, the same disturbance is applied. And if you attach a spring and limit the system onto the first hill, it will not cross the first hill and go to an unstable region. Now, bringing these concepts back to what does it mean to have a stable power system? As I mentioned before, we impose limits on the power system to prevent against a number of phenomena, and one of them is stability. And one way to think about it is that one of the ways stability occurs is angular stability. And this refers to a lot of traditional generators. They're operating in synchronism with the power system as a whole. And this is the ability of the power system to maintain and remain in synchronism after a disturbance. And the second is voltage stability. And this is the ability of the power system to maintain acceptable voltages at all buses within the power system. Now, this is the operation of the power system and what it relates to operating the power system and the type of assessments that take place within the ISO to maintain a reliable power system. And now we'll be switching gears a little bit and looking at operating this system for tomorrow, and what type of trends and what type of a power system do we expect to see for tomorrow, and what steps are we taking to ensure that we're ready for it. So I'll hand it over to Emily to talk about that.
Thanks, Ishan. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and look more forward into some of the trends that we're expecting and starting to see, and some of the changes that we're expecting to see in Ontario looking in the near-term future. So I'll start off with some key trends that we're seeing. And there are many things that are changing, and it's a really exciting time to be a part of the electricity sector, where after years of stable supply, we now see demand for electricity increasing steadily. And this is coming at a time when a large number of generator contracts are expiring.
Because that makes a great team leader,
sorry. So this is at a time where we have a lot of generator contracts expiring in Ontario. We also have a number of nuclear units that are undergoing refurbishment, and we have Pickering Nuclear that's set to retire mid-decade. But there are many factors that contribute to this increase in demand that we're seeing. We have post-COVID economic growth, expansions in transportation electrification, growth in the industrial, mining, and agricultural sectors. And all of these things are driving up energy use across the province. So this is just a high-level view of some of the key trends, which can include increasing demand, electrification across many industries, and decarbonization, which are all things that I'm going to be elaborating on further as we go through this presentation. So I have another short video here, and this is going to give an idea of some of the opportunities and challenges that are ahead of us in Ontario with a more decentralized and complex electricity system.
If you think about the last century, we've managed our electricity grid in a certain way, but things are changing and they're changing really fast. Electricity demand in Ontario is growing at almost 2% per year for the next 20 years. And so that creates opportunities for innovation. We see that at the same time as nuclear plants are ending their life, as we're seeing nuclear refurbishments and contracts are expiring. And so innovation and customers being part of that innovation also creates opportunities for filling that supply gap.
Right now, the way the system works and the way the system operates in Ontario is the power comes down the 401 and we're tasked with bringing that power to the households. So we're looking at changing the way we do business.
There's a push, not only in Ontario, but globally towards electrification. Right now, current systems aren't fully built out to accommodate for that demand and flows. So we're basically going to be taking a number of distributed energy resources like battery energy storage, solar, and EV charging, and we're going to be using our software to combine their operating characteristics to actually perform services not only for Oshawa Power, but for the Ontario electricity grid.
We're going to be able to rely on our internal network and the energy resources that are available. We're not just bringing the power to the customers, we're asking them, do you have power to deliver to us?
So users become consumers and producers of energy. They actively participate in the control of the grid and they get compensated for that. So the energy market becomes democratized.
So we can onboard more wind and solar energy in the grid, because now we have an asset that can react to when the wind blows and the sun shines and absorb that energy. It brings the energy solutions to market a lot quicker and invites more players that have a vested interest and engaging our customers in a better way for a sustainable energy future.
It's great that we have all of these technologies, but if we don't harness them and we don't play with them and look at how they integrate together, then we're not going to get where we need to go. We have resources all over the province, and at the IESO, as the integrator, we need to bring them all together. Innovative research projects help us understand those characteristics and help us bring all of those resources together and work in sync to support Ontario's supply needs.
So that video gave us a great overview of some of the opportunities that are ahead of us when we start looking at the power system of tomorrow. And when we take a closer look at the trends that we're seeing in the industry, we can start to break down what that might begin to look like. As a number of electric cars, trucks, and buses continues to rise, homeowners and businesses are considering a switch to electric heating, and manufacturers are beginning to transition from fossil fuel processes to electric alternatives. Ontario's demand for electricity will increase. And so this is putting additional stress on the provincial electricity system. We also see that consumers are becoming more aware of the environmental impacts of the electricity system and are seeking greater ability to manage their electricity use to control costs and help improve the environment. We have new distributed energy resources such as solar, wind, and storage that will continue to lower greenhouse gas emissions, in addition to allow for consumers to produce their own electricity and sell the excess. To help ensure Ontario's electricity grid is prepared, the ISO has adjusted its planning scenarios and forecasts to consider any impacts that the shift to electrification, decarbonization, transformation, and innovation may have on the province's power system. So I have one last short video to show here that's taking a look at what innovation means for Ontario's electricity system. And after this video, I'm going to break down the different aspects of innovation that are touched on, and specifically how that relates to the Ontario power system.
Innovation is about anticipating needs that you do not know about yet. It is the path that provides you for a better, improved life that you hadn't yet imagined.
Data is king. The opportunity right now is the ability to digitize the electricity grid from a bricks and mortar platform to a data-driven information platform.
Storage is actually quite important. You have a solar panel and a storage battery in your home and you're going to use it today, but tomorrow you're not going to use it. Could you give it to your neighbor? And could you actually get money or benefits in exchange?
As we manage the change around us, the ISO is using its unique vantage point to enable innovation that can drive down costs and enhance reliability of the electricity system.
So breaking each of those down, I'll start off with anticipating Ontario's future needs. The ISO regularly evaluates future demand and supply using the resulting forecasts as the basis to assess near, medium, and long-term resource and transmission requirements, as are informed by ongoing feedback from stakeholders, as well as taking into account demand drivers of the transmission system and other inputs. So a few of the key factors that I've included on the slide here are the state of the economy, the population, demographics, technology, energy prices, input fuel choices, equipment purchasing decisions, consumer behavior, policy, and conservation. Ensuring Ontarians have access to affordable power when and where they need it is really at the heart of the ISO's mandate to promote a reliable and cost-effective electricity system. And so this long-term demand forecast sets the context for the bulk power system planning process. Taking a look at the concept of digitizing the power system, there are a number of significant benefits that we're likely to see. And so going through a few of these, I'll start off with maintaining grid stability and reliability. The real-time action of energy assets and industrial loads could provide accurate frequency regulation and demand response, which would provide new revenue streams for struggling fossil fuel assets. Monitoring the grid and identifying points of failure and faults. So software and storage could defer grid upgrades, and the digital technologies that were originally applied to the transmission grid could also spread to the distribution grid. Optimizing and forecasting energy production. Forecasting wind and solar outputs is an excellent opportunity for digital technologies and would better enable renewable energy integration. So if we're equipped with better forecasting systems, we would be able to use fossil fuel assets more accurately as peaking plants to better regulate supply and demand, as well as cost. Digitizing the power system will also give end users more control. So looking at an example of solar home systems like rooftop solar, if this were to be matched with smart home energy management, it would enable homeowners to sell excess electricity to the grid or even things like joining blockchain schemes. And lastly is managing distributed behind the meter generation. So as we're starting to see more outputs being decentralized, these digital systems are very necessary to provide transparent monitoring and data integration. Overall, when we look towards the power system of tomorrow and areas which we can innovate, and we're seeing this innovation, digitizing the power system is something that will be a key part of that transition and is something that we're already starting to see. And the last aspect of innovation that I want to touch on is the importance of building a flexible power system and how we need to be and how we are moving towards that in Ontario. Traditionally, grid flexibility involves utilities enrolling large industrial energy consumers in load curtailment and demand response programs to help adjust the balance between supply and demand. These electro-intensive users would reduce or shift their energy during peak periods in return for financial incentives. But today we're starting to see that demand is increasing and grid flexibility is becoming far more complex. Investments in renewables mean energy flow is bidirectional, with decentralized energy coming from multiple distributed energy resources. The intermittency of these renewable energy sources implies significant systemic requirements for flexible solutions and developments of the energy sector in general, particularly in the power system. This is a critical paradigm shift for utilities where, given the pace of innovation, it's challenging to strategize for a future that includes rapidly growing distributed energy resources and new technologies. So to be flexible at the utility scale means that we need these advancements at every level of supply, demand, and the network itself, all of which can take form in many ways, some examples of which I've listed on the slide here. Energy storage is one of the big topics in the news and in the industry these days. And so I wanted to take a look at an energy storage case study to look at what some of the system benefits and some of the integration challenges are that we're seeing. As part of the government's unsolicited project assessment framework, the ISO was directed to enter into a contract with a 10-year term for the 250 megawatt Oneida energy storage project for the provision of capacity and regulation services. This project is located in southwestern Ontario and will provide clean, reliable power capacity by drawing and storing renewable energy during off-peak periods and releasing it back to the Ontario grid when energy demand is at its peak. So taking a look at some of the benefits that this will provide to the system, the first is reduced cost. With inflation and increasing transmission costs, we know that reducing cost is a top priority for utilities and their customers. So this project is adding capacity, which provides diverse services to the grid, such as lower cost and new revenue streams. Examples of these services include peak shaving, frequency regulation, voltage support, demand response, system resiliency, and emergency power during critical outages, among others. The next benefit is sustainability. To meet the electric grid's highest periods of consumption, which we know as peak demand, we often rely on natural gas plants, which can quickly ramp up production to meet the needs of the grid at that time. But these plants are expensive, and oftentimes they're inefficient and carbon intensive, where on the other hand, battery storage systems like this one produce zero on-site greenhouse gas emissions and may be deployed to augment peaking capacity or to eventually replace the need for peaking generation entirely. The last benefit that I'll mention is increased reliability. And we know that energy storage can increase reliability in multiple ways. Firstly, it can help to maximize the value of renewable resources to the grid. Secondly, it can increase capacity and resiliency on the grid at the most strategic times, where intelligently deployed energy storage avoids or defers the need to build out new infrastructure. And this is sometimes called a non-wires alternative. And lastly, energy storage can provide additional local and system capacity at the most critical times. Now, when we look at this from a system perspective, there are a number of challenges or considerations with integrating these types of large battery or energy storage resources. And so the first of these is modeling. For these newer resources and newer technologies, models may not be available for all softwares or be as thoroughly studied as those technologies that we've had in place for the last 100 years. And so, as Zishan touched on previously, it's imperative that the ISO has models that accurately reflect the performance of the equipment so that we can study, plan, and operate the system effectively. So with this rapid pace of innovation, it can at times be difficult for the models to be developed and implemented in that similar fast timeframe. The next challenge that we see is protection schemes. And that's because they become more complicated when we're looking at storage technologies because of their duality of at times looking like a load on the system and at other times looking like a generator, depending on whether it's injecting or absorbing power. So one of the main considerations that needs to be accounted for is operational complexity. For example, special protection systems or remedial action schemes. Today, each of these schemes has categories of either load rejection or generation rejection. And so now this resource is at times acting like either one of these, and we need to consider what these displays might look like and what challenges or complexities this might introduce in real time for our control room. Another challenge that we need to consider is transmission constraints. And we need to take into account where, how, and when these new projects can be connected. There are numerous areas in the province that are what we call constrained, and this means that transmission capacity is limiting either the load or generation in that area. So when we're now starting to see all of these projects, we really need to take into consideration not only the technology in itself and how that will work, but also how that piece of the puzzle will fit in with the existing infrastructure. So coming back to the Oneida project, we expect for all of the benefits that I mentioned to be provided to the system. And looking at the challenges, these are not barriers to entry, but rather are considerations that have been assessed and continue to be managed as we near the in-service date for this project and others like it. Today, we're more reliant on the benefits of the digital age and rapidly developing innovation. And at the ISO, we're hiring for jobs today that didn't exist 5 years ago. We're also starting to see that the skill set that's required to succeed in this industry is beginning to change. And we're living in this world where we have all of these new technologies, automation, and AI tools that can be implemented in our day-to-day work. And so we can really see the importance of lifelong learning in this industry as technologies change and we do have this rapid innovation. We can also see that the industry is focusing more on sustainability with strong links between energy use, social and economic development, and the environment. And really the climate crisis is defining the current energy transition. These initiatives require the electricity system to accommodate new types of generation in new locations, including variable generation sources whose output depends on the wind and sun. And the system must also promote increased consumer involvement in electricity consumption decisions and incorporate two-way power flows on lines that have historically been used for delivery alone. Over the past few years, Ontario has undertaken some bold initiatives that both underscore the need for a smart grid, as well as help us move towards it, in addition to taking many steps to reduce the environmental impact of the energy sector. So building upon that, the ISO has taken steps to develop framework under which we can facilitate the orderly implementation of new and diverse resources while supporting broader industry, economic, and environmental trends. So firstly is the long-term request for proposal. And Ontario is entering a period of emerging electricity system needs, as I mentioned. New decarbonization policies coupled with rapid growth in the mining, greenhouse, and industrial sectors are accelerating electricity demand across the province and heightening needs in certain regions. So long-term commitments serve as a mechanism to secure services from resources that require a long forward period or commitment period, such as new build facility. The annual planning outlook forecasts electricity demand, assesses the reliability of the electricity system, identifies capacity and energy needs, and explores the province's ability to meet them. So we know that Ontario's supply mix will undergo significant change over the next 2 decades, and energy requirements for new resources continue to emerge around 2029. And existing resources will need to operate differently than today to meet these increased capacity and energy requirements. The Pathways to Decarbonization is a summary of the dependencies, risks, and opportunities that are involved in this transition to decarbonization. So this is something that provides valuable insights into the scope and magnitude of the effort that will be required. And within this, the ISO has developed a series of no-regret actions that will help to ensure a state of readiness to manage any future uncertainty and risk, while also maintaining the flexibility to take advantage of opportunities as they emerge. And lastly is the innovation roadmap, in which this positions the ISO to act on priorities that will enable us to deliver on our mandate while undertaking, supporting, and participating in projects that will benefit the sector overall and result in the lowest cost to consumers. Development of new solutions to important challenges, including the challenges that are posed by innovation itself that are relevant to the ISO's mandate and for which existing solutions may be inadequate or inefficient. So we find ourselves in a very unique situation where change and uncertainty are affecting the landscape. As the ISO, it's very important that we take control and seize opportunities while we deliver on our role to make our system reliable, sustainable, and affordable. So to summarize, we are continuing to move forward with our flexible and competitive framework for resource acquisition. We are exploring pathways to decarbonization in the electricity system and supporting decarbonization of other sectors. We are creating opportunities for more resources and innovation to drive down costs. And we are proactively engaging with audiences, including municipal leaders, to help inform the many important initiatives underway. So I'd like to end this presentation by saying that the industry will continue to change and grow rapidly in this time of energy transition and decarbonization. And so what I've shared today is the perspective that we have based on the information that we know today. But that's not to say that next year or next month even, there may be a new policy released or a new technological breakthrough that will completely change the landscape once again. So in this time of change, it's important that we continue to be agile, forward-thinking, and adaptable to continue to capitalize on these exciting opportunities to come. So that concludes our presentation. We'd like to thank everyone for attending today, and we hope that you've enjoyed the session. We'd also like to thank the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers for organizing National Engineering Month this year. Unfortunately, it looks like we've run a little bit long and we don't have any time for questions, but we've included our emails on this last slide here. So if anyone has questions or would like to discuss further, both Zishan and I would be happy to have that conversation with you if you'd like to reach out. And just to conclude, I would like to thank the sponsors of National Engineering Month this year. I'll just scroll through the last couple of slides.